So
really
I'm in my
love
terminal
Wikipedia,
now,
and I would
and
advise you,
you don't really have to
learn
keep
to
this
use
project
Wikipedia.
in
Though I
your
mean, it looks
Go
boring,
root,
but
because since Golang
it's
1.12
good for you, right?
anyways,
In
they
terms
have
of
Go
what
modinit,
you
which you're
learn
going to do
from there.
anyways out
So
here.
I'm
Go
dropping
modinit
this
takes care
on
of
the
everything. I mean, you don't need to
chat.
really fill
So
anything out.
kindly go
All right.
through it.
So
You
here
can
we'll
open it
say
from your end as well
we'll
to
make a directory
understand.
first. We'll say
To understand the
go
concept of flowcharts.
serverless,
And this is not
invite,
technical, right?
right?
It's not
And we'll
technical
cd
at
into
all,
this.
but I think
Go
it's
serverless
something
tab
that
invite,
you need to
invite
know.
is basically
So
YouTube.
imagine we
And
have this
project
very simple
name
diagram.
specifically.
We have a process
Right, and
right
here
now.
I'll say
This can be your front-end code. Probably
go
you're trying to
modinit,
authenticate, right? And you can say, okay,
which is basically
check the username and password. If it works, do this, and if it doesn't work, do that. Right. So in this our scenario we have on our screen, we have a very simple use case where they are checking if lamp does not work. Right. So and they said if the lamp does not work, the next thing is more like a conditional, right? And it's asking, is the lamp plugged in? So this is a conditional. A conditional will always have two options, yes or no. And similarly, we have your if statement that has yes or no, like true or false, right? So you say if this, else this. We'll talk about that. So this is a conditional. Is the lamp plugged in? If no, plug in the lamp, right? If yes, is the bulb burned out? So this is another question. So anytime you see this is a conditional. It's more like diamond shape, of course, but we'll call it the condition shape when you're working with the flowchart. So the question right now is if yes, then check if the bulb is burned out. Is it burned out? If yes, replace the bulb. If no, replace the lamp. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward, and it's always good to understand the flow of things before you write your code. Don't just jump on writing code, but try to understand what you're trying to check. So in this scenario, we're going to make an assumption, right? We're going to make an assumption. So let's go to our code editor. So our assumption right here, So our assumption right here is so the question right now is if yes, it's then just want to be able to bond out. Is it bond out? If yes, replace the bulb. If no, replace the lamp. Okay, so we have a bulb. We need to if the bulb is functional or not, and execute some tasks along the line. Okay, so we have a bulb right now. We need to check if the bulb is working or not, and if it's working or if it's not working, we have to execute some things. That's why I said we have to execute some tasks, right? And when I mean task, I'm just referring to a couple of statements, right? It can be your console log statement just to check. So basically, writing if statements, you start like this, and you are going to check for a certain item. What I'm going to do right now is just to create a very simple. Item. I'm just going to call this. I don't want to go the route of classes, so let's talk about let's bulb. So let's see what we have on our conditional plugged in and also bulb burned out. Okay, good. So is bulb plugged in. So whenever you see like is starting a variable with is, most times it means they are trying to put in more like a boolean, and of course boolean is true or false values, right? So true or false. So I'm going to say is bulb plugged in true, and we're going to have the second value which says is bulb burned out. Right. We're also going to leave that as true. Okay, so this is our defaults. Ideally, maybe you should be working with a class like an object, and you should be able to reuse it. You should be able to check probably bulb dot is burned out or bulb dot is plugged in. Stuff like that. And I definitely would love us to model this as an object, but unfortunately, I don't think we've covered classes in detail, so let me not go that route. So what we're going to do right now is to just do a quick check. Is bulb plugged in? And we're going to say okay, So we are saying if this particular value, as you can see, I didn't put any value such as true or false and all that. The reason is because by default, when you have a true value like this, you can just say if is Bob plugged in. By calling this, automatically is going to assign itself to true, right? But it's possible for you to also go ahead and use true or false. That is very possible. This is very possible. So let's just proceed right now. Is Bob plugged in, which is by default going to be true, and we're going to get this response, and that is because we assigned a true here. So let's quickly run this and see what we get. So we said if is Bob plugged in, we should get this response, which, as you can see, we have Bob is plugged in, right? And if we change this to false and we run, you see nothing happens because we don't have any condition that is checking the result of this. So at this stage, this is false. So this is going to amount to false, meaning we can't run this. So this is a condition. The same way you say if this user is authenticated, go to this page, else return to this page, probably the sign-in page or so, right? So if is Bob plugged in, which is if this is true, then tell us that it's plugged in. And at this point, we can now say else Bob is not plugged in, right? So let's see, now that is false, Bob is not, let's see, I think I need to first save, right? Okay, yeah, so that's correct. Bob is not plugged in, right? Okay, so now that we have Bob is not plugged in, very simple if statement, if and else. You can use the if without the else, it's also valid, but if this is not met, you definitely get nothing. So you must definitely make sure you are looking at the kind of process you are building with your flowchart. Of course, it's gotten from this flowchart. So always learn to outline things as steps first, probably in your head. In your brain, just try to outline this process. So what we're doing is first maybe like step 1. I love to do this. I do this even till today. I like to outline, especially when I'm building like some kind of large systems. I like to outline steps, else you'll be lost at probably in the middle of the project. So I can say step 1, check if the Bob is plugged in. That's step 1. And step 2. Step 2 should be check if the Bob is burned out, right? So now that it's plugged in, we're getting this response. Let's say when it's plugged in, which means if we have here, so this is where we get yes, right? If this is true, for example, we say, so this is yes, and this is, else, which is more like the no, right? Of course, you can switch this around, but this is more like the yes and the no. So I'm going to take that off. And what I want us to do is when we've discovered that the Bob is plugged in, let's go ahead and now check if the Bob burned out, which means we can go ahead and just put another if statement within the first if. So this is already called nested if statements. So we have if it's burned out, and we perform another operation in here, right? So if it's burned out, then tell us Bob is burned out, because we also said true, right? So if it's burned out, then tell us that the Bob is burned out. Else, so we can have another else in here. Is not burned out. So in a real life application, of course, you might not be doing something like this. You might be using like a couple of should I say functions, to really explain, to really make your code look neat and very clean. Of course, but I mean, we're doing if and else, and I think we should take a look at this code and just try to understand what's happening here. If the Bob is plugged in, tell us the Bob is plugged in. Then when the Bob is plugged in, please check if the Bob burned out, right? So if it's really burned out, tell us that the Bob burned out. So, but the thing about this is this will only be met if this is correct, which means if this results to false, then it's going to skip down to this part and everything in here won't be checked, right? It means if Bob is plugged in, then check if the Bob burned out. That's what you're seeing here. So it can only check if the Bob burned out when it is plugged in first. which is exactly what we have on our diagram. And I hope you understand this. It's quite straightforward. So whenever you see this, these are referring to like, processes, right? So lamp doesn't work. Okay. Check if it's plugged in. If no, tell us to plug the lamp. If yes, then check if the bulb burned out. If yes, replace the bulb. And if no, repair the lamp. So it's very simple for us to just go ahead and, use all these messages, but definitely we do not need to go that far, but of course you can check if it's plugged in. I think that should be here. No, sorry, that should be in the else here. Plug in lamp, and then this replace bulb. You can have that in here, right? So let's test again. Let's see what we have. So bulb is plugged in, but bulb is burned out, right? What if we have a false here, which means the bulb is not burned out? This is what we get. So bulb is plugged in. So we said is bulb burned out. So right now we're saying else replace bulb. So I think now the logic is kind of like it has kind of like shifted, of course, because we're doing something wrong here. Because we're supposed to have like this we're supposed to be checking is bulb burned out, right? And if this was actually true, that is when we get this value saying the bulb is actually burned out, right? So unfortunately, because of the way this was implemented, we're getting replaced bulb because we used false, which is of course giving us else condition. That is why it's always advisable to work with functions and objects so that you won't get confused by tiny details like this. So at this stage, we have the bulb is plugged in, but because this is true, the bulb is burned out, right? So that is it for if and if-else statements. So as I said, your if statement can work without the else. Always have that at the back of your mind that you can actually have your if without the else. So basically what happens is on your statement, you have your if, and you have the condition. This is whatever condition you want to put in here. And of course, your condition can come even in the form of a function. So if just imagine we have a function is burned out, for example, as a function, and we'll return maybe true. It means if you call is burned out in here, at the end of the day, you're going to be getting true, right? So console .log bulb is burned out coming from function because we're definitely going to hit true, right? Coming from the function. So now we're able to call a function, not just any variable with true or false, but we're able to call a function because the function is returning a boolean, which is true or false. What if we go ahead and maybe use true, just like this, and we run this? So see what happens. The thing about JavaScript is actually able to automatically do some conversion, which I won't advise you to do in your production code because ideally this is yes. So I think what is happening here is the function is actually checking if there is even a return value in the first place. So imagine if we have like equals true, right? If we have equals true, so this is the point where I think it won't work because what we are returning right now, though it's a value, but it's not a boolean. It's not a boolean value. Right now, it's a string. So I think instead we can now decide to check for strings, but this is already an anti-pattern, I would say, because it doesn't really make much sense to do this kind of comparison. Because what if the person put a value like true? Let's see if JavaScript would also recognize this. So you see, the true with the capital letter is definitely different from the true with the small letter. So one thing you can always do if you have use cases like this, is to always return your response as a lowercase, right? You can always return your response and convert it into like a lowercase before validating like this. Okay, so always have that at the back of your mind, but it's better to return a boolean value at this point. So basically that is it. You have your if and you have your condition passed in here, either as a variable, a direct variable, or maybe as a choose my changes. Okay, either as a direct variable or actually as a function. Okay, so let's take this off. I believe I believe you get this. Okay. All right. So that is it for the simple if and if else. Also, I think we can also do if else and else if, right? So yeah, we also have like if the condition. If you have a condition here, and it's met, do this. Else if we have another condition, right? Do this. You can still have like multiple else if, right? Okay, so you have another condition again. Do this as well. Then maybe you cannot say else, which is like the final condition, right? So this is also valid. You can have multiple conditions. Maybe you're checking multiple conditions. You can say if a is equals 1, or if a else if a is equals 2, else if a equals 3. Just do different things, right? So a equals 1, maybe. 2. 3. I just declared a to be 1. Can't spell log. So this is just a very quick example. So let's run this to see what we have. All right, so we said A is not, of course, A, yeah. You can see A is 1, of course, because A is equals 1. So we're doing like, you can still change this to like 2, run again. So as you can see, just right there, A is equals 2. Okay, so we've tried the if statement, the if else, the if else if, right? Maybe we can also try something. Probably we can try doing some checks using what we call the Canary Operator, which is, I think I would say, is more like a short form of writing your if statements. We're going to do a very simple example, then I will explain how it works. So it's actually very similar to your if statement, but I would say it's not as comprehensive if you're doing something very large. You can use it for a lot of use cases, but basically, if you're building some systems, sometimes I would also advise that you stick to your regular if statements if you have more developers working on your team, so that everyone would understand what you're doing. So let's work with something called the Canary Operator. Okay, so just imagine you're trying to check. I'll write a very simple statement here. So let's assume we have, we say, let person or person's age. So there's this example we always see on the internet where someone is going to walk into like a bar, right, and is going to try to order a drink, and they're going to check the age, right? If the person is up to 20 or maybe up to 18, then you can now give the person a drink or not. So let's assume that we're using 20 or 22. I think, I think people probably, let's use 20. And we have like, we just define, okay, let's go ahead and put our statement. So let's go ahead and put our if statement, and we'll say if person's age is greater than, for example, greater than or equal to the person there, which is like the person's age as well, right? We're trying to repeat, but let's because this is not a function, so let's assume that this person is 18, right? We can say console.log you can have a drink, right? I think this is say else we can't have a drink. So this is simple, right? You can have a drink and you can't have a drink. If you are above, the person should be able to, get a drink, right? You can have a drink. So let's try to use what I described earlier. So this is basically if else. Let's just use a canary operator here. So I'm going to say the person's age is greater than or equal to 18, which is person's age, right? Is greater than or equals 18, and then we put this, which is to check our condition now. So we're trying to bring up like true or false state, the true or false condition, right? And of course, if it's true, we can console.log you can have a drink, right? And the next thing here would be so let's see. The next thing here would be another message to probably tell the person that they can't have a drink. So I think most of the time we use this ternary operator if you are probably assigning this to a variable, but we can also put in our console have a drink, right? If you worked with this before, what if this person is let's see, if this person's age is like we said greater than or equals 18, what if this person's age now is like 16? And we run, you cannot have a drink. So this is just like a very simple form. Instead of writing just at this point, then you have the question mark, which is basically the ternary operator, and you're checking for this item, and your response, the truth value and the false value. So like the main value that you should. Okay, if the check fails, right? Okay, so this is a very little example of what you can do with the ternary operator, right? You're just making your code a little bit clean, but it depends. If you're working on something large, then I think this might end up being a problem, long term. Okay, so let's work on something. Let's work on something very simple. Let's talk about the loops again, right? So let's just talk about JavaScript loops, so you understand that. But I think before we even talk about the loop, I said something earlier, variable. I said we have we're just trying to explain something. And reference correct, right? And reference types on that already, numbers, strings, Boolean, and the rest of them. And they are actually considered to be primitive types. So I'm going to explain or try to break down the difference between these types. So you might have seen some explanations on this online, but maybe not properly detailed to the point where I would say you understand it properly. When we say something is primitive, the idea is actually coming from the way they are stored, right? The way they are stored and accessed within the system, or within the processor, basically, like at the ground level. Let's just say within your system. So you have like variables such as I think I have to also comment on this to avoid getting errors. So we have variables such as let name equals okay. So I think I am going to go ahead and close. Okay. All right. So also probably sorry. Oh, okay. Okay, so we have an example. We said let name equals string, or maybe equals John. we'll say let's here username, right? And we'll say the password object. It's a very simple object. So I'm trying to explain that at this point, this is kind of like at the end of the day, the way this is stored on your computer, this is actually stored on what we call the stack. We're not going to go deep into the science of on this, like the details, like what they teach you in computer science department. We're not going to talk about that at all. But you just need to understand like primitive and reference, because definitely you will see this in like interview questions and all that. So in your primitive type, this data is stored on the stack, and you can easily access it, from there. While for the reference type, this is an example of the reference will be stored on the stack, and the body this part on the heap, because it's actually referenced. So this item has to reference this, and most times I think the reason for this, putting this in their own spaces like this in the stack and the heap is basically for the purpose of memory management at the end of the day. So you have a lot of details that can come into the objects. I think this should be user. Bad spelling again. Okay. So this should be user object. So which is this? That sits from the heap, and as I said earlier, it's basically for proper memory management. I'm not going to go deep into that, but just so you know, objects are basically stored on the heap with the types, which is like John Doe. You have your integers, your boolean, and the rest of them that are your pure, your basic types are actually stored on the stack. Yes, so let's quickly try to also let's try to also talk about. I think we did a couple of loops. We did a couple of loops. I'm not also going to say that a couple of things you can actually like have multiple ways of doing some of these items. For example, looping through array in JavaScript, definitely there is a major pattern that a lot of developers like to follow, which is doing an array for each. But this is just like the base for creating like a loop. So, for example, you say 5i++. So, what is actually going on here? Let me explain. Yes. So, the idea of the for loop. Let's take this off. So, and also this. Right. Okay. So the idea of loops generally, whether it's while loop or for in loop, or basically to have to go round and round a certain item based on what you've set, based on your configuration. Of course, just like I said, let I equals 1, which is we've assigned default of I to be 1, and we said I is less than 5, which means we're telling I you are 1, but you're less than 5, right? So that's the length. Don't take too much time. You're 1, but you're less than 5. Okay, so then we said I++. So the I++ there means I is going to be incremented by 1, right? Which is I++ is basically I plus 1. That's, what it actually means. If you have minus minus, I minus 1, just like that. So what would happen here is we are logging the value of I, and the expectation is this is going to run the first time. It's going to assign +1 to I, so you're going to first have 1, have 2. Let's see what we have. Okay, so this is taking a while to run. I'm still trying to figure out why. Okay, so as you can see, that is the output, 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, because we said it's less than 5, so which means if we say less than or equal to 5, then definitely to get to 5. And, you can definitely also increase the length. So let's go with 30. Let's not go with something very, very large. Is anyone finding it difficult to see my Okay. Go to print from 1 to 29 because we said it's less than 29. So, I mean, basically, yeah, come on. We're able to print this, and as you can imagine, where would you use this in like a real project? So, for example, you're trying to display a lot of, let's say, Twitter cards, right? Twitter, like, tweets from Twitter, and you got this item from an API or so. You can actually use a for loop to loop through the array or the item that the array of objects you received, and you can say, okay, for I equals 0 or equals 1, I is less than the length of that object, right? The length of what we received. Then I plus plus, right? So it's going to go through that particular content and it's going to be grabbing all the objects one after the other. Then using your JavaScript code, of course, you can say, okay, paragraph should pick the particular item from the object, the heading should pick this particular item from the object, the blog should pick this particular item from the object, just similar pattern. And we'll definitely, use the for loop again, but I just wanted you to make sure you understand the for loop in the first place, and this is what it actually looks like. This is the base. There are so many ways to use the for loop. We have other ones like for in loop, for each loop, and if you definitely, I'm going to drop a material at the end of the day so you can read up, but you will definitely find yourself using this most of the time, and also you find yourself using something like the array. Maybe you are trying to loop through an array, right? So you will find yourself using something like the array dot for each. Then you definitely pass in more like a function, the array. So if there's a particular item on every single item found, perform this particular task on every single item found inside the array. So basically, that's what we're referring to there. So let's take this off. Yes, and of course, try to show like maybe multiple cards. Of course, JavaScript cannot, HTML cannot give you that kind of manipulation. So that's where JavaScript actually comes in. Okay, so I think that is it for the primitive types, the reference types, talking about. Okay, talking about the for loops, the conditionals, and all that. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at our agenda once again. And I think what we should be looking at right now is to answer a couple of JavaScript questions. So we have to be very interactive at this stage. I drop some questions and you do the answering. We're going to do that on the chat, right? I think this call is enough to do that on the chat. We don't necessarily need to use any external app or something. So let me get some of these questions, and we have to be fast. We have to be fast, so we won't waste too much time on this. At least once it's 9, I think we can move down to objects. So let's see. JavaScript question. Okay, so so I'm going to be dropping these questions. So once you see the questions, please go ahead and start answering. Okay, so definitely I gave you like a quick overview about what is also referred to as arrow functions. Just tell me what you understand by arrow functions, right? And let's be fast, please. Every single question is going to have a max of 2 minutes. So if you can't type your response in 2 minutes, that's bad. So make sure you drop your questions as fast as possible. Okay, so there are ways to create functions. Okay, there are new ways to write array functions. No, I don't agree with that. Array functions are functions to return any input in the parameter. So, anyways, they are basically, of course, they are basically referring to functions as well, even though they have a different way to probably write them. I don't think. I think another thing is, that might look a little bit complex. So someone said they are confused way of writing our functions without the need to use return statements, or if you want to use a return statement, in it you can use parentheses. Okay. Okay, so arrow functions using this. Okay, ways to write functions differently. Concise. Okay, arrow functions are ways to create functions. I mean, still good. Still good. Okay, so I think the thing about the arrow functions is, especially if you are doing trying to create server-based code on your front end, you might also love to use arrow functions. And of course, they were introduced in. Oh yeah, correct. They were introduced in year 6, and they make your what? They make you use functions as though they are variables. Oh, yeah, of course. So they make you use functions as though they are variables, probably functions that you don't want to change. Maybe you can declare them as constants, right? Or you can also use the let keyword or even the var keyword. I think it's also a concise way to write functions. I would also agree with that. It looks a little bit clean, compared to having the normal function. And I say clean because, of course, you have like enough space to visualize your variables, right? But I think it's almost it's not a big deal. Arrow functions or the main functions. Let me ask another simple question. I think right now I need to go back to something simple. So I want to see your idea on the context of JavaScript. So just tell us what is JavaScript. Give me I want to see different answers. Then I would answer if maybe your answer has some kind of things, some kind of words that I feel are a little bit problematic. Based on the response, I will definitely correct that as well. So tell me what you think about JavaScript. What is the main purpose of JavaScript, and why do you think we can't even use some other things in place of JavaScript? Just tell me, what you think. What is JavaScript? All right, so let's be fast. Time is already counting. Okay. Interactivity to a web page, correct. Front-end developer, that is very correct. Creating interaction on the web page, awesome. So I think this is the simple part. A lot of you can definitely answer these questions. So please drop your response. Okay, so let's see. JavaScript is a way of making your web pages more responsive. JavaScript is a programming language, which is an object-oriented language, and is used for adding functional interactivity to web. Okay, that is good. JavaScript also has a couple of other paradigms. You can write functional codes in JavaScript very well as well. You can also write imperative programming style in JavaScript. JavaScript is a scripting language that adds interactivity. Okay, good. Someone also says it's an OOP language. All right, so I think this is good. This is straightforward. Okay, let's try to round up on this response so I can drop the next question. So if you're looking at the chat, I'm dropping the next question right now, and some other answers might override this. Just try to make sure you're saying it. So the next question is, what are JavaScript data types? So tell me some of the types you know. Just mention some of the types you know. JavaScript is a front-end technology that is used to manipulate the DOM, giving behavior. Awesome. Okay, so on your keypad, if you're using your laptop for typing, you can just hold Shift-Enter, or you can use a comma. So use a comma to put your response, so you won't have multiple responses. Just use a comma, array, string, object. Of course, that's valid. You also have boolean. Good, nice one, Anna. Boolean or boolean. Yeah, so some people pronounce it as boolean, some pronounce it as boolean. JavaScript is a client-side script. Okay. Arrays, awesome. Numbers. Awesome. Okay, so we also have the null type. Yeah, we have the null type. That is good. The integer, float, I think everything falls on that numbers. We have undefined. Awesome. So that's a very good response from you guys. It shows that you're actually following through. I'm sure maybe you might have seen you might have seen a response known as the NaN, right? So I'm going to drop 2 questions regarding that. So what is NaN in JavaScript? Whoa. Okay. Okay. So my question has not even, there's already an answer to that. Beautiful. So this is good. This is good. So I was actually typing the question. Let me just delete that. It's okay. I can see that you all know that already. Okay, so there's also a function known as is nan, like is NaN. So I don't think that should even be a question. Like, I mean, you already know what NaN is. So basically, this is used for some sort of checking, right? So you can also check for different types. This is used for checking if something is going to return with not a number value, then you can handle it, right? So you can say if is NaN, right, in terms of like the item you're trying to return, then you can now handle that accordingly. Okay, so let us see one other quick question. We're supposed to deal with 10 questions here before we move on. Okay, so some of you said undefined is a data type. So probably, yeah, Sanjo to check if awesome. Okay, so what are undeclared and undefined variables? So when you see undefined, for example, what does that mean? So for those of you that are not responding, you need to understand that this is not like some sort of competition. You just have to be part of this. It's a community, right? You have to try to interact. So go ahead and drop some messages. You don't have to just remain idle, right? For some of the answers that go ahead and drop a couple of responses here. Okay, so undefined variables are variables that values are not assigned to. Awesome. Undefined variables means a value isn't given to the variable. All right. Okay. So yeah, you can go ahead and drop your answer. I mean, even though it has been said already, go ahead. Okay, so let's imagine we have let's function and we're trying to write our code in a function. I think that is just like the context I'm giving here. Given the fact that we have a function, we want to write our code in that function. Now, go ahead and answer this question. What are global variables and how are these variables declared? So go ahead and drop your answer to that, please. Let's be fast. Okay, I think one last question I would drop here before we proceed. Oh no, I think we still have like a couple of questions. Okay, so let's drop this as well. All right, so I can see your response. Global variables are variables that can be used to assign values later. Okay, in our code, and they are declared using the lets. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know what you mean by that can be used to assign values later. I understand it from the practical angle, but I mean your definition should also be more clear next time. So Adeni said global variables can be accessed from anywhere, but the local variables can't. Also, of course, which means your local variables is basically a function, right? And you can't access it from another function. That's the correct answer. Global variables are variables that can be accessed from anywhere. Okay. Okay, so when you mean anywhere, probably you also try to, maintain the fact that you're describing that particular module or that particular file, like the main.js, for example, and probably not within another file, except you have to export it, right? So I get your point. Variables that are set anywhere in the file. Yeah, awesome. So anywhere in the file. Okay, so global variables has a universal lifespan, while local variables has the lifespan ended as soon as their context is exhausted. Okay, good. So I think I also like that. And what it means by the context is exhausted is basically describing the scope, right? So when you have a function, the moment you pass the braces, like the closing braces, it means you've automatically passed the scope. Global variables are declared outside the function for stability through the program. So I can see, we have a couple of you guys, the front end guys on this program. You guys are really smart and I really love your response. I see a lot of people are also typing. Adeni, probably you're answering. Okay, I think you've answered already. So I'm going to draw the next question. So what is the difference? What is the difference between this and so just I was supposed to have a question mark there, but I hope you have seen the question already. So we have two we have when you use the equal operator twice or thrice or three times. So what is the difference exactly? Okay. Yeah, so I think Anna, Anna said having the three equal sign is for strict comparison. And when she says when she's saying a strict comparison, you need to also understand, like in detail, she's actually describing comparing both the data type and the value, right? The data type and the value. Okay, so yes, and Osasiri said the double equal sign checks for just the value, and the triple equal sign checks the for the value and data type. Awesome. Strict, and the other one is isn't strict. Okay, this means for Richard, when you say equal is basically when you have the single equal sign, which is also an assignment. So when you use, I think you have to break it down, but I get your point. It means equal, to the value, and the other one is talking about equal to the value and type. Okay, all right. So Sanjo, I don't think that is correct, except I don't understand what you mean. So the first checks if they are equal, while the other checks if they are equal, and identity. Okay, equal to. Okay, good. Okay. So nice one, guys. You see, we are learning from each other right now. You're dropping your comments, and we are seeing the various ways you think about this, and your mistakes, of course, will be corrected. So I think Abbas also correct. Convert the variable values to same type before performing comparison. Well, don't put it that way. Majek, I think I would call you Majek. Don't put it that way. I would rather say you stick to the fact that you're checking for both the value and also the type. For the two different scenarios there. Adeni, that is good. Okay, so the next question right now coming in. Let's see. I need something. Okay. Okay, so basically, some of you might have used this, but it's also a good way to learn. So, how can you convert the value of a string to another value, like to integer? So, imagine if you have like 10 as a string, right? How can you convert this to int? Like, what is basically the okay. So yeah, I'm already seeing a good response. Pass int. If you think it's wrong, please go ahead and drop your response as well. I mean, if you think it's wrong, tell us what you think. Okay, so there are lots more that you can do with and combining code. Of course, you're going to be doing a little bit of PM, right? But that should be when we start doing Vue. For now, I think basically you'll just be using Node to run your JavaScript code directly instead of using the browser. But starting from next week, we'll be using most of our JavaScript in the browser as well. So we can start, doing some front-end interactions with our DOM, which is basically document object model. Okay, so I see, you all know this already, of course, past int. That is great. I think one of the final questions, this is the final question, was it? Oh, yeah, I think we've already passed out. We've already passed the time. We're supposed to stop this by 9, but the final question, let's go for it. Okay, so we are saying, does JavaScript has concept level scope, which is basically what we've discussed already, even while we started answering this question. So tell me if it has. Awesome. Okay. All right. So I see that you guys are super pumped up on this call already. So this is awesome. And mind you, these questions are actually interview questions, so you just need to know. You might go down to some interviews. Maybe you're not writing data structures and all that. You can have like over 30 or 40 of these kind of questions with people sitting around you and expecting to see you answer them. So you just have to practice some of these questions already. You can go online, search for JavaScript interview questions or basic JavaScript questions, and practice with what you see right there. Let's talk about objects, right? Let's talk about objects, and let's talk about objects. So I think before we get down to objects, we've discussed loops, right? We skipped this, which I'm definitely going to explain again. We skipped this. We did a couple of revision already. We skipped this. We are supposed to have some questions on objects, so this is going to be more like a reversal, right? So this is going to let's do something here. We're basically going to reverse this. So that is like work on objects. Let's have that in here. I hope you can still see my screen. Drop this here, copy this, and paste it here. Finally, go to sleep. Okay, so let's change the numbering 7 and 6. Okay, so let's just talk about Node, right? So I've discussed this several times, and Node is something you use to run your JavaScript code out of the browser or outside the browser. And Node is not a programming language. Node is an engine, right, running JavaScript, which of course is the engine is actually based on the Chrome engine, which is known as V8. So you are actually doing what you should do in your browser offline, which is on your local machine, and that's the reason why it's currently been adopted at a very large scale for backend development as well. Building microservices, building frontend. You have a lot of frontend frameworks, Vue, React, Angular, and some others. So just to have that at the back of your mind, that's basically what you should be using Node for right now, right? Downloading Node on your laptop, using it for running basic JavaScript for the meantime, and in the future we'll be using the package manager, which is the NPM, known as the Node Package Manager, to install a couple of dependencies and libraries to work on some kind of project. So just in case you don't know, you can get Node. You can download Node from the official website, node.org, and make sure you download the long-term support version, which is recommended for most users. If you already have experience with this, you can also try out new features. They have a couple of features that are also coming out in the next version, and I think you can definitely read up from their website, and you see some of the new releases they are coming up with, like adding the fetch API. If you know that, adding the fetch API to Node so you can perform your API requests. We are not doing that yet. Also, we have NPM, right? NPM comes bundled with Node, so you can use the Node Package Manager to install plugins, and also you can visit NPM, just check it out, know what it's used for. We are going to be using it in the future, not now, just so you know that it comes with Node, and we're definitely going to be using it. So when you say package managers, a package manager is basically kind of like a repository you have a lot of packages that you can easily install, uninstall, use on your code base, and make your workflow even faster instead of trying to build up some of these things from scratch. You definitely would need to use the package manager most times. Just have that at the back of your mind, right? Okay, so that is basically what you need to know at this stage about Node and the Node package manager. Okay, so I'm not going to open up my terminal because a lot of people have complained severally that it's kind of confusing, having me work on the terminal. Most times when I open the terminal, basically I don't expect you to learn or watch. I don't expect you to understand everything I do, but it's still basic. All I do is just open up the terminal, create a document, and navigate around, open the document, and then test what I'm doing with Node. But if you find it difficult to understand, me working on the CLI, we're going to be using REPL IT for the meantime, and you can also go ahead and use REPL IT with us. Yeah. All right. So, what are JavaScript objects? I think I will just basically make you understand that JavaScript objects by default actually is a collection of key value pairs. And when we say key value pairs, let's come down to REPL IT and explain that. So we have an object, for example, I said user, and every user should probably have like a username, right? And username is actually like Joe 56, for example. Then password John 1 2 3 4 5. Very bad combination. Yeah, but this is an example of what I mean by the key and the value, right? So this is the key and the value. This is the object, and of course, this is a reference type. This is what stays on the stack, and this is what stays on the heap. So the thing about this is you can actually define like an empty object. You can define an object and assign key value pairs directly into the object. So defining empty objects, you can just do something like let empty objects equals this. And why would you want to do an empty object? Maybe because you have seen the properties of this object as you move on. You can say empty object dot value equals 1. So just an assumption, right? The thing is, in some other languages, this would definitely not work. In JavaScript, this should work. So if I do console.do, it's very dynamic, and that's one of the amazing things about the language as well. So assign the value, okay, and that came in, right? So value 1. So this is the key, the value, right? The key and the value. So if you understand that, we can also go ahead and log this user, and then you see that it gives us both the username and the password. You have an object, and every object has properties. So let's explain the idea around the object from a realistic standpoint. So we're not looking at classes now, but of course classes are also objects, right? But we're looking at the objects from a very simple, container holding some properties. So just take, for example, you have like a bucket, right? You have like a bucket, and actually you have like a bucket, a real life bucket, and of course every object has properties. Don't quote me on that, but of course I think when it comes to programming, our objects has properties. So for example, we have a bucket. The bucket can have a property like size, right? Like color. What else? I don't know. Maybe I should say spec. And this spec would describe, maybe it's a kind of like a aluminium bucket or a place there. Yeah, so you have different properties. Let's just take the size and color. If I want to model this right now, all I have to do is to say let bucket equals object, and our object, we have the size of the bucket, and let's say size 10, if there's anything like that. Always remember to put in your comma because you're trying to put in another item, and also we can say that is the color of our bucket. black, which is what most seen types of buckets. So I'm going to run this, right? So now we have user. Every user should have a password. But of course, imagine if we're trying to model something even bigger than something that has two properties, maybe like a human. We can say let human equals number of hands, number of legs, the tone, like your color, right? The gender and all that. You can have a lot of properties in here. That's just one thing you need to know. The next thing is, how do you access individual properties? So basically, I think we call it, this is the topic of assessing properties, assessing object properties. And one thing we always like to focus on is what we call the dot notation, right? And the dot notation is, you trying to access items, the properties using the dots, right? So let's say something like create a new bucket size equals bucket.size. It's not compulsory to create a new variable. You can basically just print this out, but I just wanted to show you that you can attach the size of this into a new variable, and this is valid. Or we can just do console decide to run this. Now an error, and let's figure out where the error is coming from. Is that not defined? Yeah, because this is a color, and this should be in a string like this. Okay, so let's run again. Let's see what we have this time around. So we have 10 because size is 10. So that is it for assessing these objects. Basically, you can use the dot notation, which is the first way assess the object properties. Also, the second way is when you decide to use the array, kind of like array notation, the array notation. So, for example, we can put in size. Always remember to put properties more like or a double quote string. So we have the size, and if I run this, of course, we are still expected to see the same result, which is 10. So this is to tell you that you can actually access, these properties using the dots or using the array component like this. So imagine if we now have nested objects. So maybe we now have this is bucket, and maybe we now have to do this in here. Let's use something like this. So you have like a preference, and the preference actually has to be another object, and then you have like the theme. Like, so for example, they're trying to use a website for concrete objects. You have an object user. The user has a couple of properties from username to password to preference, and now the preference is a sub object that has the type, the property of theme, right? So let's see what we can do here. Now we have the user, and we can access the user just like this. We can do preference, right? And what do we get when we run? Let's go ahead and test. See what we have. So you see the theme. So is it possible for us to see? Is that possible? Let's go. Is it also possible for us to remove the dot notation and go ahead to use this? Let's also go ahead to verify and see what we get. All right. So as you can see, we still arrive at this the same value. So you can use this to access even nested objects, which means even if you have more nested objects, you can continue to access it like this, or you can just say the user.preference.theme, and that would also work. Okay, so just try to understand this. This is the JavaScript object. Also one thing you need to understand is it is possible, but this is not advisable, right? It is possible that the key of your object has some space. So I'm going to give you an example. I've seen this several times. I don't like it though, but it's very possible. So let's assume that every user has kind of so let's say office number, and you want to model this office number. Of course, by default, you might want to add this together, and this is kind of casing. But imagine if you want to maintain this space. It's actually very possible for you to put this, and let's say your office number is 5. For example, remember your comma. You can still run this and also get the office number. So let's see. We have the office closest number is 5. So yeah, it's possible, right? So this is possible. So you can go around, check it out, and play around with some of these things we've done so far. Yeah. So you have like you can actually alter the value from outside the object. So imagine we have user dot username, right? Changing the value. We run this. Maybe we should print out the entire user to see, what we get. But yeah, we have to change the username to value, from outside the object. Okay, so that's great. Yeah, now you're able to. I hope you can still see my screen. Somebody said we did not complain. Please use the terminal. Anyways, a lot of people complained. Yeah, so you might be familiar with it, but of course, a lot of people are not familiar with the terminal. So of course, this is what your object looks like. One other thing is you can actually delete a property from here using the delete keyword. Most times, I think you would use the delete keyword, especially if you are trying to present something to the user, or you got some data from the server, or you don't want to keep a specific data, maybe because you think it's kind of like sensitive data. Ideally, you would want the sensitive data to leave the backend and to the front end. But let's just assume that you're just practicing. You can actually delete something like this. So let's assume the password is actually sensitive, right? So you can actually say delete user password. This is possible. Okay, so we're able to print this, and as you can see, we have the office number, the username, the preference, but now no password. So we're able to delete the password before presenting this on our screen, which is a very good, very nice thing to know, that you can actually have, you can actually have your item and also delete it, using JavaScript directly, just like this. One other thing you need to know is the fact that we can actually do something like checking if a particular property is found within an object, and of course to give us like a true or false response. So imagine if we're trying to check if the username is actually within this object, before we access it, just to do a very simple check. We can just do, let's log this, console.log the username, right? So if there is a username in user, right? So we can, let's take this off, and then so let's see. Yeah, you see we have true, right? So imagine if we have like departments. Again, the department in user, and we check this. Of course, we do not. So always remember that yes, we can do this. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now before we also proceed. This is a simple JavaScript object. This is the idea about using JavaScript objects from the base, right? From the base, this is what you should know so far. So I'm going to go ahead and ask just about 4 questions. And let me see how you are able to deal with those questions. Then we can now move on to the JavaScript arrays, right? Okay. So question number 1 coming in. What is a JavaScript object? Simple question. Go ahead and give me your responses, please. All right, so please let's be fast on the chat. What is a JavaScript object? Good, nice one. The collection of key. I think it's key value pair. Let's see. Yeah. Key and value pair. So we have a lot of things that also use the key and value pair, the key value pair pattern, like some kind of databases, NoSQL, Redis, and yeah, some other things. But yeah, so it's a good pattern. So key and value. Okay, you corrected that. Okay, so Osasori said that objects are reference data types used to assign multiple properties to values. That's a very good answer. JavaScript objects are used to keep more complex entities. Okay, that's also beautiful. I think I understand where you're coming from with that. So you see why I think the interactive sessions are great is because we get to see a lot of responses, a lot of people's opinion on some of these things. So from Abbas, he said JavaScript objects is used to store multiple values in the form of key value relationships or key value pair relationships. That is really good. Okay, so that is one of the questions, and I think the next question we should look at right now is how do we assess the properties of a JavaScript object? Okay, so how do we assess? Sorry, how do we assess the properties of a JavaScript object? All right, so I'm waiting for your question, for your answers. Type them in. Let's be fast. Okay, so someone said we could use the dot notation and the square brackets too. Yeah, good. Yeah, Sandro, you were wrong there. I get your point. That is basically to print or present. I'm talking about assessing. The object name dot name of property. Yeah, good. All right, well answered. And I think the next question now should be, what is the delete keyword used for while working with objects? Okay, so what is the delete keyword used for while working with objects? Yeah, so Sasori said it is used for deleting object properties to delete wrong data. Well, let's not say wrong data. Let's just say data that you don't want to be visible when sending it out to your output, which can be the front end or probably just a terminal. Yeah, Richard said it is used to delete a property from an object. Abbas said to delete information for a particular index. Okay, so I think that's also a good keyword there. Index, which basically you know from your array, also applicable to your object. So the index is referring to the position, so a particular position. But in this case, you refer to that position using the key, right? Using the key. So that is good. Okay, so I think the final or the last one. Okay, so how do we check if a property is found within an object? Yeah, Sanjay, you said it is used to delete information that is presented, but okay, omitted by the delete. Okay, so I think your grammar there is kind of amazing, but I think I get your point, right, Andrew? You get the point there. Okay, so key in the object name. Okay, good. Quite interesting. I mean, you guys are really for this session, and I'm really liking this. Huh? All right. So I always know that what we'll definitely do more at objects. But I think before we leave the objects and probably go down to arrays, I think it's quite necessary that you also understand that you are not really like subjected to utilizing objects, but the idea that it gives you a lot of values in respect to holding items together or structuring items, which of course you can do with classes as well, right? But objects are very important part, especially of working with JavaScript, especially as a front-end developer, because most of the data you consume are definitely going to come in as array of bunch of objects. If you're working with REST, which is also which also means you are definitely using what we call JSON. We are going to talk about that also in future classes. One more thing is to try to understand the fact that even within your objects, you can have methods, right? You can have functions. So let's say what should the user be able to do? Maybe simply login and login out, So we can have login, right? And of course, we should be able to say user.login, right? So which means you can put in a couple of prints. This is JavaScript. So console log. Oh my goodness. We can have this login function, and also we can also have function. We have our comma here, and we can have like the logouts, log. Okay, so this function also regarded to be your object properties as well. So just have it in mind that they are still your properties. All right, so I believe we're all following. Yeah, we're just quickly going to talk about arrays, and we're going to talk about arrays and thing we should be touching. We'd also have like to answer a couple of questions and to make sure everybody really follows through. Yes, so let's talk about arrays. And we've discussed about functions previously. I'm just going to show you like I don't think we need to stress on this, but we just need to talk about arrays and also a little bit about functions. So let's just spend 3 minutes. Let me just run through functions before units of computations. Right? I think we've discussed about functions. Yeah. So units of computation. So for example, you have a particular stuff you need to do, a particular like task you need to perform. You don't necessarily need to do everything as a bunch of statements on the JavaScript file. So let's assume you want to write a program that can add two numbers, something very basic we have all seen probably. So you don't need to say let A equals 10, let B equals 10, let C equals A plus C, A plus B. So you don't necessarily actually say, you can actually put this in it. The thing is, if you run this file every time, you're printing out these things, but you might want to just put it probably in a space where you can invoke or call that particular block of code when you need it, right? So as such, you've created like a unit of computation, a block of code performing a specific task, right? So in this case, we can have like function sum, and then we're going to have like the source. So we can have like A or B, right? And then in this function, we can have like probably return A plus B. Okay, so let me tell you something about what we call pure and impure functions. which I also think it pass to. But yeah, so a pure function is something that is meant to perform a particular action and perform only that action. And yeah, definitely performs that action well. But when you say something is not a pure function, it means you're probably doing a couple of things there, maybe calling a different function like console.log, of course, is a method entirely, doing something different. Yeah, maybe you're also making like some sort of network request outside the fact that you said you were supposed to use this function for a specific thing, right? So it's always good to write pure functions. For the fact that I said the other functions are not pure does not mean you should not use them, because definitely, you are going to be doing a lot of manipulation. So you are definitely going to write a whole lot of functions that are not pure. But you just need to know the differences, right? In case it comes up somewhere, you are asked that somewhere. So of course, you can also have the arrow function where you have like let sum. So you put in the variables in like AB, or let's say value A. And value B, right? And then you have this, then you can return value A plus value B. Okay, so the amazing thing about the arrow functions is now you can easily just define, it looks like, you started with let, it looks like a variable, and all of a sudden you have a function. Someone said it's a fancy way the fancy and the confusing way to declare to declare functions. I think it's good. I mean, it looks good. This is looking quite easier, anyways. But by doing something like this, you can actually you can easily do things like exporting this function. You plan to export this and use this in another file as well. You can just have something like yeah, I think this exports, right, and this is definitely going to work. Because unfortunately, this isn't inside the function anymore. We are exporting it already. Yeah, so this is good. Works. All right, so that is it for functions. We are declaring a bunch of code base, putting them in different block of code, and you're going to use them for different operations at the end of the day. Okay, so what are JavaScript arrays? So let's talk about arrays a little bit before I show a couple of examples. Yes, so a JavaScript array is basically a container that has a list of values. These values are definitely ordered, right? So the way you put them in, the values are ordered, and each value is actually called an element, and each element has a pointer, which is also referred to as an index. So let me explain that. Okay, so imagine you have, I'm going to take a screenshot from a page, and then I'm going to open this screenshot so you can see. I believe you can see the whole screen, right? So you should be able to also see this screenshot. This is taking my time. Okay. So we have a screenshot here, and trying to explain the concept to you. We can definitely work with this. It's true. And they're just trying to prove to you that in JavaScript, you can have an array holding multiple values. Well, some languages would be very strict on that. And for example, C++, you should put in data of the same types into arrays, right? But in JavaScript, of course, it's dynamic. We have the numbers, string, and finally, we also have the Boolean value inside the same array. And yeah, you can see the index. And the index is basically describing the location of things. Of course, you're seeing we have 1, 2, 3, 4, just showing the pointers. Ideally, your array starts it counts from 0, but the index there is just showing like locations, pointers, and every single item on the array is referred to as an element, right? So 1 is an element of the array, 2 is an element of the array, 3 is, as a string, is also an element of the array, and finally the Boolean value is also an element of the array. Which means, looking at this, your count is going to be basically 0, 1, 2, 3, which is a total of 4 items. But remember, because of the index starting from 0, we do 0, 1, 2, 3. But at the end of the day, you have 4 items. Yeah, so that is what an array is. And let's go ahead and try an example. So an array, you have to first declare your square bracket. So we can say let arr equals an array. So you can have an array, and probably if you want to kind of like assign items to these arrays. Two ways to create arrays. I will show you the other option now. But let's just assume that you want to declare an empty array and probably add a couple of items into this array. I will show you how to do that. I will show you how to change the values of arrays as well. So let's start by saying we have an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So this is an array. We also have an array. So let array 2 equals this another array 1, 2, 3, 4 as a string, and also 5 as a string. Then maybe you have like array 3, which unfortunately is empty for some reasons we don't know. But soon. Yeah, then we also have where we have to actually use the array objects, right? So we have to call the array object itself. So we can do that by saying let array 4 equals new array, right? Here we can put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So for the first one, array carrying a number of items, similar items, of course. Then for the second one is just to also make you understand that you can have an array carrying a bunch of similar items and other data types as well. As you can see, we have a mixture of string and numbers or integers. Then we also have let array equals an empty array, which means we can definitely have an empty array. And yes, even after having your empty array, you can also append or push items into that array. So which means from our empty array here, I can say, let's print this first, right? Let's print this first. So I'm going to do console.log array. Maybe I should call that array 1. That would make more sense, right? So we have array 1 is so we have array 2, array 3, array 4. I think that's we don't have array 3, do we? No, we do not have array 3. Okay, so all right, so we did error there, and basically I think it's because we also called this array. Yeah, we definitely have array 4. This again. As you can see, we have our outputs. The first output is the combination of numbers and string value. The third one is having our empty array, and the final one is almost similar, but of course we used a different pattern. Here we created a new instance of the array object. Okay, so similar stuff. Now that we have the empty array, I think that's what our focus should actually be on. How do we add items to this empty array? So basically, we can say array3 dot push. I'll put in our first item, for example, John Doe. Okay, so we're going to assume our array. So you see, we started by declaring this array as an empty array. Along the push some items into the array, and we have those array items displayed here as John Doe. Now, imagine we want to access like a specific value here. Go ahead and take this off, and let's say console.log array1, right, with an index of 0. What's the expected result? let's see, we run this and we get 1 because array 0 is actually pointing on the first item, which is 1. What if we say array 4? What do we get? We have 5 because we did 4, of course, which is 0, 1, 2, which is definitely correct, pointing to 5. So that is how to work with the indexing that we'll be talking about. You are able to point on several index and see the values sitting on that specific index. Okay, there are so many other array functions that we can use. We have things like shift on shift. We have removing items from the array, pop, pop. So we can say array2.pop. I think it's better I explain this here and I'll just give you like something to read up. So we have arrays.pop. So maybe when you use pop, if I use pop on array2, I'm basically going to take off this last item. So anytime you use the pop, array2.pop, just calling array2.pop, we're going to take off the last item here. So if I console.log array2, so we're definitely going to take off. So because whatever you call the pop function, it takes off the last item. Okay, so I think this is good. You can also use index off. Index off is a method that tells you the position of a specific item. So the position is that, the index. So it gives you the index of that particular item. Then you can also check if an array is to check if an item is an array by calling array2.isArray. So you can definitely do that. Yes, another thing is check out W3 School for some of these things. So just navigate down to the array part. So yes, so you can also I think I'm seeing some questions there, so let me go ahead and respond to that. Okay, so you said can any existing array be pushed, or do I understand that? Can any existing array be pushed on an empty array? Oh yeah, of course, yes, you can. You can actually do that. Using spread operator, where you create a new array and spread out the values of the previous array into the new array. But remember that I think that really works with ES6. So you're already talking about using ES6 features. If I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected. Maybe it should be ES. Let's see. Trying to get the version. But I'm also going to show you an example on how to do that. So imagine we have like array 2 or array 1. Then we also have like an empty array. This using the spread operator, I won't advise it for every. I don't think I would advise it for every single use case out there. I think sometimes you actually think the spread operator uses like ways. So if we go ahead and probably spread out using the spread operator, I'll show you a couple of things you can do, right? So let's assume in here we do ... array 1. Let's see what we get if we go ahead and console.log array 2. Right? We have array 2, which basically I would consider that, I would say let's array 2 equals empty, right? Is an empty array, and here we go like item here into array 2, which is basically what you see here. Do a spread operator example from the Mozilla developers website. So as you can see, we have a three numbers, and then we have the numbers here 1, 2, 3, and then we have console.log sum, which is a function and I will carry these three numbers and position them inside here. 6, I think maybe I should go ahead and ask a couple of just maybe like 1 or 2 questions here, then we can call it a day. So one of the first questions, please straight up to the chat. One of the first question here is, oh yeah, thank you, Adeni. So the spread is here 6. Okay. So what are the ways to create JavaScript arrays in JavaScript? What are the methods used in creating JS arrays? Okay, JavaScript arrays. Okay, so that's the question. Okay, so expecting your answer. Let's be fast. We use the array keyword. Okay. Yeah, good. Make sure you read this things up, okay? Before the next session, make sure you read this. I mean, I can't wait to get down to objects so we can start, creating some nice, doing some nice implementation. And I hope you guys are practicing your HTML and CSS very well. Always practice. Go down to W3 schools, consume as much materials as you can. If you also need some extra materials tomorrow, I would. I mean, if you say you need some via the chat, I would also share a couple of materials. But of course, it's a new month we're entering, and definitely we're about to start moving very fast with a lot of assignments. So I just hope you are able to. I mean, I believe you can keep up. I just hope you do the hard work, right? Okay, so I think the next question here is, can array have or hold? Okay, can JS array hold multiple types? So this is just a yes or no, right? Can JS arrays hold multiple types? Is it possible for JavaScript arrays to hold values of multiple types? All right, now you flooded me with a lot of yes. That is good. So awesome. I mean, nice one. It's nice having all of you on this session. I would always advise you, go on Twitter, tweet about what you've learned. If possible, also do that on LinkedIn. So that we'll be able to, people will be able to keep track of your learning progress. And of course, most especially, love to see you do all these things. They love to see you post what you've learned, and they love to follow up with you on your journey, so that once they lay their hands on meaningful, awesome opportunities, they can just hit you up and ask you to apply and probably take the interview. So make sure you are sharing this on Twitter. Just make sure you are sharing like almost every class experience you have on Twitter. And I think I would also advise that you go ahead and tag topskill_org. I'll drop a message on the chat, or I think one of the moderators will drop that message. Drop what you've learned so far. Tag the official handle, the official Topskill handle. Also follow. Let me do one final thing. If you did not see the previous link, W3 Schools, go ahead, look at this link. Study objects in details, study functions, study arrays, because in the next class we're going to do a couple of revision again. I'll ask a lot of questions on these things. I expect you to have learned a lot of things and be able to follow through during the class. And finally, we should be set to start working with the DOM, the browser DOM, and at the same time creating some kind of interactive items or components using JavaScript. Thank you very much for the session, and I wish you peace and joy. Have a wonderful time. Bye.